Well, it's been a while since I've done an Iceberg video, hasn't it? So yeah, since it's been quite a long time since I've done an Iceberg video, and also because there are also a few superhero movies coming out in the next few months, I've decided to cover the cancelled superhero movies Iceberg. If you don't know how Iceberg Explained videos work, for the 5 of you that haven't seen one of these before, this list that I've found on Reddit, links in the description to the original Iceberg, they go from the least obscure cancelled superhero movies, and as you make your way down the little iceberg, the entries become more and more obscure. With that, before I get into the Iceberg itself, please support my Patreon where you can get some really cool benefits, as well as some commentary tracks every week on things that you guys can suggest, as well as things related to what I make videos about on this channel. Also, of course, like and subscribe. Anyways, let's get this Iceberg started by starting off with the first layer with Green Lantern Corps. The first entry of this iceberg, being Green Lantern Corps, is related to the cancelled DC movie based on the character Green Lantern and the Lantern Corps he's a part of, exploring the planet Owa and the other people across the galaxy who also have a Green Lantern ring. This movie was announced all the way back in 2015 when DC was going through with the DC Extended Universe with a scheduled release of June 19th in 2020, which obviously never ended up happening. The movie would have issues behind the scenes with even getting a script done, as nothing was heard about the project until 2021, where it was said that the movie was going to come out in 2022 or 2023. And then James Gunn took over the studio with Peter Safran, where they kind of repurposed the idea into a TV show called Lanterns. As the show Lanterns goes, it's meant to be a crime drama series for Max releasing next year, focusing on both John Stewart and Hal Jordan as the two main Green Lanterns the show focuses on. So the idea kind of lives on, but not really, since this is going to focus on mainly 2 Green Lanterns instead of the whole Corps in general, and is a part of the DCU instead of the DCEU, since the DCEU is dead. Rick Familiar's The Flash. So, did you ever wonder why The Flash took so damn long to release? Well, this entry is one of the main reasons, since this entry is referring to an older version of The Flash, which before talking about the entry itself, this would have been much better than what we got, because damn, The Flash is an awful movie. Anywho, as the entry itself goes, Rick was an up-and-coming director back in the year 2014, as the Flash movie was announced with Rick at the helm to direct the movie, starring Ezra Miller as the title character. A script was created for this version of the movie, and even though the script has never surfaced, there's rumors that this version of the Flash was meant to feature villain characters like Captain Cold and even the Golden Glider, but also have Cyborg in a major role in the movie, which is strange. Anywho, as work was being done on the movie, Rick eventually dropped out of the project due to creative differences on the 31st of October in 2016. Not much else to say, but even with Cyborg being a major character in this version of the movie, which I find to be an odd choice, it would have been much better than what we got. Spider-Man 4. Okay, I think absolutely everyone knows about the cancelled Spider-Man 4 at this point. Not the new Spider-Man movie coming out next year, but Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4, which was meant to release on the 6th of May in 2011, but ended up getting cancelled when Sony decided to reboot the franchise with the Amazing Spider-Man series instead. As this cancelled movie goes, there are some storyboards and things like that around for this movie, showing off the opening fighting scene and other scenes throughout the movie, which was meant to have the Vulture as the film's main villain, and supposedly Black Cat and the Lizard were meant to show up as well. Surprisingly with this movie though, Sony only went with the decision to reboot the franchise when Sam Raimi himself admitted that he couldn't come up with a suitable story that he wanted to tell in a sequel of this franchise, and even though he was upset with how Spider-Man 3 turned out, he had to cancel the project. Sinister Six. Speaking about rebooted Spider-Man, this was meant to be a movie that mainly focused on the villain group known as the Sinister Six, which are made up of all Spider-Man villains, as they team up and try to take Spider-Man down. This was meant to be in the Amazing Spider-Man universe, but with the Amazing Spider-Man 2 doing so poorly, it ended up being cancelled, and the only thing we got out of it is this teaser to the Sinister Six at the end of the Amazing Spider-Man 2, with this post-credits scene. Apparently the movie was mainly going to focus on the team having a face-off against Spider-Man after he gets the Venom symbiote, with the movie showing one of the Sinister Six trying to track down the meteorite containing the symbiote. Seems kind of interesting actually. But of course this is also cancelled because of the deal that Sony was going through with Disney, as they would allow Disney to use Spider-Man in the MCU. Cyborg. Okay, so this one was technically never cancelled because they never started working on the movie anyways, but it was announced as a movie that was gonna happen, so I'm gonna count it. This entry was a superhero movie which was meant to focus on Ray Fisher's portrayal of the character Cyborg in the DCEU, with a planned release of April 3rd in 2020, but we obviously got nothing out of it. That's the only information we knew about it, since they never developed a script or anything like that for the project, and we never even got an announcement on anyone attached to the project besides from Ray Fisher coming back as Cyborg. With the issues Ray Fisher had with Joss Whedon's reshoots of Justice League, it's easy to see why nothing ever came from this project, since Ray had been quite vocal about his negative experiences with the Justice League reshoots under Joss Whedon. Black Panther 2, pre-Wakanda Forever. This is referring to the original plans for Black Panther 2 before Chadwick Boseman's passing in 2020, since a Black Panther 2 with the same title was announced at D23 in 2019, since the first Black Panther was a massive success for the studio, with Ryan Coogler coming back to direct. The only thing we knew about this version is that it was about T'Challa meeting his son for the first time after disappearing, as he of course has to save the world at the same time. There's nothing else known about the movie besides from a release date of May 6, 2022 being announced, since the 2020 pandemic affected production, and of course Chadwick's passing was the thing that made this version of Black Panther 2 cancelled. Inhumans. So before the Inhumans series came out, which no one seemed to like, it was originally meant to be a movie scheduled to release in 2019 as a part of the MCU's Phase 4. Development on this movie started all the way back in 2014. We don't know exactly why this movie was cancelled in favour for a TV show, but plans for the movie were delayed back to 2019 because of the Disney and Sony deal to bring Spider-Man to the MCU, and eventually just got removed outright. I originally thought that this movie was cancelled in favour for the TV show, but no. Apparently we were going to have both the show and a movie, but that obviously didn't happen. The Amazing Spider-Man 3 and 4. Okay, so Sony were very keen with pumping out more and more sequels to The Amazing Spider-Man, as they originally had plans for both The Amazing Spider-Man 3 and 4 to come out 2 years apart from each other, and the third movie was going to release 2 years after the second movie. We don't know anything about the fourth movie since no real development had started in that movie, but with the third movie it got announced that it was going to release on June 10th in 2016, all the way back in 2013, even before the second movie came out. The plot of the third movie was meant to show Peter giving his blood to revive some people that had died during the events of the last movie, as he'd have to face off against new villains that this movie would introduce. We don't know exactly who, but if this cast list is true, then it seems like it would have been just a massive mess with what, 7 or 8 villains? That's just ridiculous. Anyways, the movie got cancelled because of the 2014 Sony hack, as well as the contract Sony went through with Disney to allow them to use Spider-Man in the MCU, and even Andrew Garfield himself admitting that he was getting too old to play the character. Justice League Mortal. Back in 2019, George Miller, yes, of Mad Max fame, was set to direct this Justice League film with the plot following Batman creating an army of robots to replace the Justice League, as his plans backfire since the robots turn evil and they all have to team up to stop the robots. With the robots being the main focus of the film, it was also meant to have Maxwell Lord and Talia al Ghul as the two main villains of the movie, with Max probably being responsible for the robots turning evil. We have two main reasons why this movie was cancelled, with the first one being the massive success of The Dark Knight, and of course the writers' strikes that happened in 2007, which kept on going into 2008. Layer 2. Batman Continues. Batman Continues was the original plans for the third Tim Burton Batman movie before Joel Schumacher came in to make Batman Forever. This movie was apparently split into 3 parts in the one movie, with the first part having Riddler and Two-Face as the main villains, then Scarecrow would be the main villain for Chapter 2, and the last chapter had Clayface as the main threat. There's actually quite a lot of information on this movie if you decide to Google search it, since some development on the movie was done before it eventually being cancelled. The main reason why this version of the third Batman movie was cancelled in favour of Batman Forever was literally because of the more dark and disturbing nature that Batman Returns had, as the movie wasn't very advertiser friendly and couldn't easily be advertised to children, and obviously had the massive issues with McDonald's. X-Men Origins Magneto. Remember X-Men Origins Wolverine? Yeah, that movie sucked. And that's basically the reason why this movie was cancelled, since X-Men Origins was going to be a series of films exploring the well-known X-Men characters' backstories. This one of course is going to dive into Magneto's origins, but after the critical and financial failure of X-Men Origins Wolverine, they cancelled the whole project, and used the idea of showing Magneto's origins in X-Men First Class. Edgar Wright's Ant-Man. This one really hurts my soul, since an Edgar Wright Ant-Man movie could have been awesome. Anyways, as the movie goes, Edgar Wright was originally meant to direct the movie Ant-Man, with him also co-writing the script, but eventually pulled out in 2014 due to creative differences. Peyton Reed ended up replacing him as director of the movie, as the movie released the next year in 2015, where Edgar Wright was credited as an executive producer and a writer on the film. Everyone, and myself included, believe that the studio didn't give Edgar Wright much creative control on the project, and that's one of the main reasons why he ended up leaving the project in 2014, which really sucks because knowing Edgar Wright's track record, we could have had something great. Well, he went on to direct Baby Driver, so he was chillin'. Iron Man 4. Another entry on this iceberg which was technically never cancelled since nothing was in the works for this project. But anywho, Iron Man 4 was a movie that Robert Downey Jr. was interested in making, with him wanting Mel Gibson to direct the project, but it never went through. There was also a War Machine spin-off that was apparently in the works which also got cancelled, and I think that kinda sucked. James Cameron's Spider-Man. Okay, so this movie was a James Cameron directed Spider-Man movie that was scheduled to release in either 1995 or 1996, which obviously ended up being cancelled. The movie itself was just titled Spider-Man, with the plot focusing on a 17-year-old Peter, as he has to face off against Sandman and a new character named Carlton Strand, who was meant to be based on both Electro and Kingpin. This movie was mainly cancelled because Paramount and Marvel were both on the verge of bankruptcy around this time, and couldn't afford to spend the amount of money that this movie needed to be released. Superman Lives. I feel like everyone knows about this one too, but basically after the two Tim Burton Batman movies happened, he was slated to direct a new adaptation of Superman, which was meant to release in 1998. This movie was going to be an attempt to reboot Superman after the Superman franchise died in 1987 with Superman 4, as this movie was going to have Brainiac send Doomsday down to kill Superman, whilst also blocking out the sun so Superman's powerless. This movie was going to attempt the death of Superman story from the comics, as Superman dies but also comes back to life by a Kryptonian robot, as Lex Luthor, played by Kevin Spacey, merges with Brainiac to become Lexiac. Before moving on to the next entry, the casting choices were very strange. Of course, we all know that Nicolas Cage was going to be Superman, which is weird enough, but Christopher Walken as Brainiac? Kevin Spacey as Lex? Chris Rock as Jimmy Olsen? And Sandra Bullock or Courtney Cox as Lois Lane? Actually, the last one isn't too bad. To finish this off, the movie was cancelled because Warner Bros. Couldn't afford taking a risk at the box office and reviews, since movies like Batman and Robin, 187 and The Postman were big blows to the studio. Black Cat and Silver Sable. Okay, so this movie was titled Silver and Black, which was focused on both Black Cat and Silver Sable, and was meant to be a part of Sony's Spider-Man universe. This was all in the works way back in 2009, with Sam Raimi slated to direct the movie, but with Sam Raimi backing out of Spider-Man 4, they cancelled the whole project for a while. Until they decided to bring back the idea in the Amazing Spider-Man franchise, as they wanted Felicity Jones as Black Cat, but nothing ever came out of that either. New Gods. I actually didn't even know that this was a project that existed, but basically this was meant to be a movie all about New Genesis and Apocalypse, as Darkseid and the Female Furies were meant to be the film's main antagonists. Other characters that would appear in the movie were Mr. Miracle, Big Barda, Granny Goodness, and Highfather. Work on this movie started back in 2018, and as work on the movie got delayed when COVID came around, the movie was eventually cancelled in 2021, with Warner Bros. Saying that it could be revived in the future. I doubt that now, but anyways, Darkseid did at least get to appear in Zack Snyder's version of Justice League in a minor role, giving us a glimpse as to what this universe's Darkseid would have looked like. Layer 3. Silver Surfer. Alright, this is actually kind of relevant with the Fantastic Four releasing in July. Anyways, this was a planned spin-off of the two Fantastic Four movies, with this movie following Silver Surfer after the events of the second movie, as he has to return to his home planet. When returning, he would discover secrets about his past and the power of his board, as Galactus was meant to come back but not as a giant storm cloud, but apparently looking more like his comic book counterpart. The reason why this was cancelled is due to the second Fantastic Four film, Rise of the Silver Surfer, getting poor reviews from fans and critics. Fantastic Four 3. Well, that's convenient that this is right next to it, since it was also cancelled because of the poor reception of the second movie. There isn't too much known about this movie besides the fact that Black Panther was meant to show up, Doctor Doom was of course going to come back yet again, and Danny DeVito was going to play Mole Man? What? Yeah, very strange, but this movie also got canned because of the same reason why the Silver Surfer movie was. The Punisher 2. There isn't really anything known about this movie, but basically this is going to be a sequel to the 1989 Punisher movie starring Dolph Lundgren as Frank Castle. The only thing known about this movie is that Punisher was going to face off against Jigsaw. No, not that one. This one is one of the character's main villains, and the other thing we know is that it was cancelled because Dolph Lundgren wasn't happy with the final product of the first movie, so declined to return. X-Force. A more recent example. Alright, well this movie was a direct spin-off from Deadpool 2, as this movie would have been all about the newly formed X-Force, which was a thing in Deadpool 2, as they would go on to fight crime in a newly formed team. The merger between Fox and Disney was the reason why this movie was cancelled, and apparently Ryan Reynolds wasn't even going to come back as Deadpool in X-Force, so I'm actually glad that this movie was cancelled. It would have just been a massive waste of time without Deadpool. Hulk 2. Hulk 2 would have been a direct sequel to the 2003 Ang Lee Hulk movie starring Eric Bana as Bruce Banner. God, say Eric Bana as Bruce Banner 5 times. Anyways, the movie was meant to explore Hulk's grey persona as Abomination and the Leader were going to be the film's main villains. The film was cancelled due to negative reviews, and also the fact that Universal missed the filming deadline. Superman, the Man of Steel. This Superman movie was meant to be a direct sequel to the 2006 Superman movie Superman Returns, with Brandon Routh reprising his role as Superman. The plot is that Superman finds out sometime after the events of the previous movie that Brainiac followed him to Earth after Krypton exploded. This movie was cancelled because of the disappointing box office numbers Superman Returns had. Also, the writer's strike, and the fact that the writers themselves didn't have many ideas for a sequel anyways. The Amazing Spider-Man Universe Venom. As the title suggests, this Venom movie was going to tie straight into the Amazing Spider-Man universe, as it was meant to release in 2018, but was actually titled Venom Carnage, with the character Carnage set to appear in this movie as well. Interesting thing about this movie is that Channing Tatum was meant to be Eddie Brock, and Matthew Lillard was meant to be Carnage, which, let me say this, Matthew Lillard would be fucking awesome as Cletus Cassidy and Carnage. Anyways, as the same goes with all of the other Amazing Spider-Man projects, this was also cancelled due to the second movie's poor reviews and overall reception. Joker and Harley Quinn. I don't even think this movie was meant to happen, but this refers to a project known as Harley Quinn vs. the Joker, where it has Harley kidnapping Dr. Phil because of the issues of her relationship with the Joker. Like real life Dr. Phil, or just a made up Dr. Phil? Like, that's strange. I thought that this was all just about the fact that they had enough footage in Suicide Squad to make a solo Harley Quinn and Joker movie, but apparently not. This movie was cancelled because of the terrible reception Suicide Squad received, and yeah, thank God. I hate Jared Leto's Joker. The Trench. Okay, I surprisingly remember this one, but this was a spin-off to 2018's Aquaman focusing on the trenches that the title character goes through at some point in the movie. The spin-off was announced in 2019, but nothing ever really came from it, as it was meant to be a horror-themed movie based on that location. But in 2021, it apparently turned into a Black Manta solo movie, which we're still waiting on. Green Lantern 2. Like any of these superhero movies, they always decide to announce a sequel before the movie comes out, and when it comes out, it fails and gets cancelled. This one is of course meant to be a sequel to the 2011 Green Lantern movie starring Ryan Reynolds, but the only thing I ever would have wanted out of this movie is to see Mark Strong back as Sinestro. That man was genuinely robbed because he looked perfect in the role and is a good actor. This movie of course was cancelled due to the terrible reception of the first movie, but also because DC had plans in making their own universe in an attempt to compete with Marvel, but also Ryan Reynolds had no interest in coming back as Hal Jordan anyways. Daredevil 2. Daredevil 2 is of course a sequel to the 2003 movie starring Ben Affleck as Matt Murdock, but the supposed plot of the movie was focusing on Kingpin in prison, as he trained in jail in order to become better in combat than Daredevil, which was also an attempt to fit the actor Michael Clarke Duncan's weight loss into the movie's plot. Ben Affleck was only interested in doing a sequel if he was allowed to adapt the darker Daredevil stories, especially one created by Kevin Smith which had Mysterio and the Born Again storyline. He ended up pulling out from the project in 2006 anyways, as he ended up feeling massive regret for even accepting the role in the first place and swore to never play a superhero again. Until he did, and arguably did it worse. Layer 4. Spider-Man 2099. So we're back yet again with a Sony movie that was cancelled due to the 2014 Sony hack, but this time around it was going to be a live-action version of Spider-Man 2099, with Oscar Isaac portraying the character. We still got him as the character anyways with the Spider-Verse movies, which is good, but it would have been interesting to see the character in live action, kind of like what's going on with Spider-Man Noir, as Nicolas Cage is reprising the role in live action. As the movie itself goes, it was going to be connected to the Amazing Spider-Man movies, but nothing is known about possible plot or anything like that about the movie. Green Arrow, Escape for Supermax. A cancelled Green Arrow movie? I never knew about this. Anyways, this movie was a Green Arrow movie which was being developed from 2007 to 2008, as the movie was going to have Green Arrow getting framed for a murder, as he has to find out who was behind the murder and also escape prison. No one knows why this movie was cancelled, but maybe they just didn't have faith in Green Arrow, but we obviously got the show Arrow a few years later anyways. Peyton Reed's Fantastic Four. I'm very surprised that Peyton Reed came back onto this Iceberg, but this is referring to an adaptation of the Fantastic Four, which started development in 1995. This movie had a few directors attached to the movie, and the final one who was attached to the project was Peyton Reed, until the movie got cancelled in 2001, in favour for what we ended up getting in 2005. Nothing is known about the movie's plot, if it had a different plot in the past or anything like that, so who really knows? Superman Flyby. Superman Flyby was a cancelled Superman film scheduled for a 2003 release, which was also meant to be directed by J.J. Abrams. This adaptation of Superman was meant to follow Clark as he's still trying to hide his secret identity from his parents, and after they find out, John, Clark's father, would be scared about Clark killing them both, which is really strange. Also, apparently Krypton was still meant to be around in this movie, which basically makes no sense, but okay. As the villains go for this movie, Lex Luthor, which would have been played by Johnny Depp or Robert Downey Jr., and a new character named Ty Zor, played by Ralph Fiennes, who is basically a General Zod clone. The tone of this movie was the main reason why it eventually got cancelled, because for a Superman movie, it was just apparently too dark. Punisher Warzone 2. There isn't much information on this entry, but basically there was a planned sequel to the movie Punisher Warzone, where the Punisher had to face off against Barracuda in Florida, which was obviously cancelled due to the poor box office numbers that the first movie received. There's nothing else to say really. Omega Red. Omega Red is yet another cancelled Marvel movie, but this was one of those movies that was cancelled due to the Disney and Fox merger, where plans for this movie were just thrown out the window. Would have been a bit strange to have a solo Omega Red movie when the character had only shown up in the background of the prison in Deadpool 2. Aunt May spy prequel. So of course, since Sony had way too many ideas during the Amazing Spider-Man franchise, this was a movie which was meant to focus on this universe's version of Aunt May, but as a prequel. Not any typical prequel focusing on the character, but as a spy movie where she was apparently a spy before taking care of Peter with Uncle Ben. What a weird idea. But of course, because of the Amazing Spider-Man 2 doing so terribly, it was canned. Raimi vs. Solo Venom movie. The Raimi vs. Venom movie, or the Gary Ross version as it's referred to, since he was meant to direct the movie, was meant to be a spin-off from this universe's version of Venom played by Topher Grace. Venom would have become an anti-hero during this movie where he has to face off against Carnage, who was going to be played by Jim Carrey. Not the worst pick, but because Sony ended up cancelling Spider-Man 4, this was scrapped, but the idea of a solo Venom movie still stayed in Sony's mind as we got the Venom movie in 2018, which ended up becoming a trilogy. Fan 4-stick sequels. There is honestly barely anything known about this, but the main thing that was known is that Fox were going to make a sequel to 2015's Fan 4-stick, but because it was bashed by absolutely everyone and did terribly in the box office, it was of course scrapped. Spider-Man vs. The Amazing Spider-Man. The last entry to wrap off this layer was both Spider-Man at this time being Tobey Maguire from the Raimi trilogy and Andrew Garfield from the Amazing Spider-Man movies were going to come back before No Way Home became a thing. This team-up movie was going to have the two fighting each other at first in some kind of way, and of course throughout the film they decided to team up against some kind of villain or threat. This movie was going to come out in 2020, but it was cancelled due to emails about the movie being leaked with a 2014 Sony hack, Amazing Spider-Man 2 of course performing poorly, and Andrew Garfield being let go from the role of Spider-Man, and even admitting he was too old for it as well. Layer 5. New Line Cinema's Venom. Okay, I'm very surprised that Dolph Lundgren's back on this list, but basically this was a solo Venom movie that was going to be released in 1997 by New Line Cinema since they bought the rights to the character in the 90s. David S. Goyer made a script for the movie which was meant to focus on Eddie Brock and Cletus Cassidy's rivalry. It ended up being canned because the studio didn't like the script for the movie and no longer had the rights, and not long after they ended up selling the film rights to Sony anyways. Namor. Back in 2004, Chris Columbus was hired to direct a solo film focusing on the Marvel character Namor, with a release slated for 2007. In 2005, Chris left the project where nothing else is known about this movie, but of course the character would have their live-action debut in Wakanda Forever, which was released in 2022. Multiple Man. Yet another cancelled Marvel movie, but this one's focused on the Marvel character that I didn't even know existed until now, that was in the works in around late 2017. Nothing's really known about the movie besides the fact that James Franco was going to play Multiple Man, but the film was ultimately cancelled because of the Disney-Fox merger, but also those allegations that came out against James Franco. Yikes. Batman vs Superman. So yes, way before Batman v Superman, we were actually going to get a movie based on the premise of Batman and Superman having a face-off against each other. With this movie, it was planned for a 2004 release, written by the writers of Batman and Robin. Yeah, that was a great sign. Not. As the movie was going to be directed by Wolfgang Peterson, who had previously directed Air Force One and The First Never-Ending Story. This movie was going to have Colin Farrell as Batman and Jude Law as Superman, as the movie had the two of them fight after Lex manipulates the two in some way to get them to fight each other. Very strange that Colin Farrell was going to be Batman considering that he had gone to play the Penguin and does an absolutely excellent job at it. With this movie, we don't exactly know why it was cancelled, but people assume it was either due to the poor script or just creative decisions that Warner Bros. As a studio were making at the time, mainly wanting to focus on solo superhero movies. Fox's Civil War. Okay, so the title of this entry is a bit of a stretch since it would take inspiration from the comic the entry is named after, but it would involve the X-Men and the Fantastic Four facing off against each other in a similar style to the Civil War comic. They were also going to use Daredevil characters and even Deadpool in this movie, as the Human Torch accidentally blows a hole in Manhattan after going supernova, which basically makes the government create a law for superheroes. The two opposing teams would fight each other but resolve their issues by the end, as they would also tease the Skrulls coming to Earth. Damn, this movie was ambitious. Anyways, the movie was canned for a few reasons. The first one was not having the rights to Daredevil anymore. X-Men First Class was going to affect the production of this movie, also deciding to reboot the Fantastic Four as well as a solo Deadpool movie. And the last reason is because the director, Paul Greengrass, who's responsible for the Jason Bourne series, couldn't make a deal with the studio and turn down the movie. Doctor Doom. I was kind of surprised to find out that this was a thing where they were going to make a solo Doctor Doom movie, but it would have been released after Fan 4 Stick, with this movie not even being connected to that one. This movie was going to have Doctor Doom inviting a female journalist to Latveria after being isolated on the Eastern European island for 10 years, as he wants to send a message to the rest of the world. This movie was cancelled because of the Disney and Fox merger, but the main man pushing the film, Dan Stevens, apparently spoke to Kevin Feige about it and nothing's been heard about it since. Besides the fact that Robert Downey Jr. is playing Doctor Doom in Avengers Doomsday. Jack Black's Green Lantern. Yes, this was real. This was going to be a superhero comedy movie starring Jack Black as the lead role, as he gets a Green Lantern ring, and is put up to the task of stopping Legion. Not the Marvel Legion. You might be thinking that Jack Black was going to be Hal Jordan, but no. It was going to be a new character named Judd Plateau, as they're a reality TV star, who was given the ring and the plot of the movie then unfolds. This movie was set for a late 2007 release on December the 7th to be exact, but I honestly don't know exactly why this movie was cancelled besides the fact that it sounds like a terrible idea. Canon Films' Spider-Man. Remember Canon Films? No? Well, the only movies I know them for were two terrible movies, with them being Superman 4: The Quest for Peace and Masters of the Universe. Yeah, that studio. Anyways, this movie was going to be produced by them as they wanted to show Spider-Man in a dark and gritty version in New York, and just to face off against Dr. Octopus. The main thing I find interesting is that Stan Lee himself was going to be J. Jonah Jameson Jr., but this movie was ultimately cancelled because of both Superman 4 and Masters of the Universe flopping. Well, to be more specific, the studio had lost a lot of money from those movies and cut this movie's budget down from $20 million to $7 million, which made the director, Joseph Zito, drop out, as the movie was cancelled and even the studio themselves would go bankrupt in 1994. There are actually posters for the movie and even a trailer which doesn't really show anything from the movie, besides the Spider-Man suit featured in the Atari game commercial of the same name, and also that fucking weird Spider-Man voting PSA. Am I the only one that remembers that? Layer 6. Justice League Dark. Yet another entry that hurts my soul because it involves Guillermo del Toro with one of his many cancelled projects. Basically, this movie was going to be a movie directed by del Toro as a live-action adaptation of Justice League Dark, which features John Constantine, Zatanna, Deadman, the Spectre, and even Swamp Thing. Del Toro actually wanted Matt Ryan as Constantine, who played the character in the 2014 show, and even went on to voice the character in many different animated films. The main reason why it was cancelled is because of the show itself, with it not getting renewed for a second season, so Warner Bros. Thought that this movie wasn't worth it. What a missed opportunity. Taskmaster. Apparently there was a cancelled Taskmaster solo movie, but whenever I look for it, nothing comes up. The only thing I see about the character is them getting headshotted within 2 minutes in a Thunderbolt. Whoops, spoilers. Let's be real, we all knew that character was going to die in that movie anyways. So if this entry is referring to something else, where they were maybe going to do a solid Taskmaster movie after Black Widow or even way before then, who really knows, and I couldn't find anything about it. Batman Unchained. I feel like everyone knows about this one, but it's down here, so let's talk about it. This was a cancelled sequel to Batman and Robin, with Joel Schumacher coming back to direct. Batman Unchained was going to release in 1999, with Batman and Robin splitting up as Batman would have to face off against Scarecrow, played by Nicolas Cage, and when being affected by the fear gas, Batman would see characters like the Joker, the Penguin, Catwoman, Two-Face, and the Riddler, as they'd all judge him in a trial. So they literally just copied the Batman the Animated Series episode trial for this bit. Okay. But throughout the movie, Harley Quinn was also meant to appear, but as a toy maker who's also the daughter of the Joker, wanting to get revenge for the Joker's death. Scarecrow and Harley would end up teaming up as Scarecrow figures out that Bruce is Batman, where they come up with a scheme to get him thrown into Arkham, with the climax having Robin come back to help Batman and stop Scarecrow and Harley. There's a few reasons why this was cancelled, with the main one being the poor box office numbers and it being bashed by fans and critics alike. The other reasons are that George Clooney hated playing Batman and regretted being involved with Batman and Robin. The actors didn't like the movie script. Warner Bros. Also decided to stop live-action Batman movies, focusing on more animated movies in the meantime. And the last reason is that the Scarecrow hallucinations scene would have costed way too much for the studio to justify. Batman Year One. This movie would have been a direct adaptation of the Frank Miller novel of the same name, with Darren Aronofsky directing the movie. The only thing known about it is that Walking Phoenix would have been Batman and Aaron Eckhart would have been Commissioner Gordon, which I find quite funny because they'd both end up playing Batman villains in future adaptations. Production on this movie would have started sometime around 2000 to 2002, and the movie was cancelled just because it was too dark. And even though we got Batman Begins after this, I have to say that this was a massive airball on Warner's part. Swamp Thing. I could be wrong about this one, but it could be about the fact that a Swamp Thing movie was announced to be a part of the DC universe, but we haven't heard anything for years. There was a one-season show in 2019 which people seem to have enjoyed, but there was a movie in the works after that which we haven't heard anything about since its announcement. Fear the Beast. The last entry of this Iceberg refers to a cancelled solo Beast movie titled X-Men Fear the Beast. This movie would have focused on Nicholas Holt's version of the character, and would have come out sometime after Dark Phoenix released, but ultimately was cancelled because of the Disney and Fox merger yet again. Apparently there's a full script to this movie out there somewhere, but the movie itself was meant to take place during the 80s and was described to be like John Carpenter's The Thing in regards to how this movie puts you in an inhospitable environment. Alright, so that was the cancelled superhero movies Iceberg done and dusted. What did you think about it? Well, let me know in the comments, and if you're curious about any of the entries in the Iceberg, the whole thing's in the description since I didn't make this Iceberg and personally would have moved some things around. I think that this Iceberg actually talks about a lot of cancelled movies, but there are a few that they could have added on here, such as Avengers, The Kang Dynasty, Batgirl, a few different Captain America movies, Batman Beyond, Tim Burton's Catwoman movie, and honestly quite a few other projects. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, give it a like, comment your thoughts, and make sure to subscribe if you want to see more videos of mine. Also, sorry for the delay in uploads, I've been sick recently, and I'm honestly just glad that it's finally finished kicking my ass, so I'm finally at the end of my sickness. Anyways, I'll catch you on the next video.